In our next case, a politician is charged with the murder of a 12-year-old girl. This is a case that had been unsolved since 1984. It's a very bizarre set of facts and also the people involved. A Colorado grand jury has indicted a former Idaho gubernatorial candidate on murder and kidnapping charges in connection with the 1984 disappearance and death of 12-year-old Jonelle Matthews in Greeley, which is about an hour north of Denver. I don't even know where to begin with this. Let's just get to a few of the simple facts, and then we're going to do a deep dive. Dana Pankey, who is 69 years old, has been indicted on counts of first-degree murder and second-degree kidnapping with a weapon. Okay, so what happened is that the little girl disappeared in 1984. And so it was basically an unsolved case until 2019 when her body was found. Can you imagine? And she was found about, 20 miles away from home, not that far. So her remains were discovered by some guys working on a pipeline in Colorado. It was like an oil and gas site. And her body was found in July of 2019. She went missing from the home just days before Christmas. It was the night of December 20th, 1984. She had been singing in the Christmas concert downtown that night, and she was dropped off at her home by friends of the family. Now, her parents were not home when she was dropped off because they were at her sister's basketball game that night. So that's why, there's a time frame in there where we know what time she was dropped off. And then when the parents came home from the basketball game, they found that she was missing. She was long gone. And what they didn't know, Judy, was, did the 12-year-old run away, or was she abducted? Did someone break in? For decades, the family had no idea what happened. And here's what the father said. He said that it was weird. The television was on. The heater by the couch was on. It was cold. It was December in Colorado. Her shoes were there as if she had taken them off after her concert, right? But her slippers were missing. And there were no signs of a struggle, really. It didn't seem like anyone had broken in. It was unclear. 1984, we really were not advanced as far as DNA technology. So it was a mystery. What happened to Jonelle? She just disappeared. So for decades, no one knew what happened. And then in the immediate, I really want to talk about her before we get to him, because we really need to understand and have some compassion here, and then look at who is accused of doing this. So immediately the community formed the Jonelle Committee. Basically, they put up flyers, ribbons, everything you could think of. And I don't know how many people even remember this, depending on your age, but about that time is when they started putting the pictures of missing and abducted children on the side of milk cartons. And it's something that was done because, think about it, there was no social media. So the milk carton was your social media. Every time you poured the milk, you saw that girl's picture or that boy's picture, and you were reminded that this child was missing, where and when they were abducted. And hers was one of the first faces that was on the side of a milk carton. Oh. The whole world was looking for her. The whole world was looking for her. So it's interesting that at the time of her disappearance, this video was not released. And we're going to show it now because it's, it's always about the victims and their families, and nothing touches a heart like seeing and hearing someone, especially a child. So 5 years ago, detectives decided, let's look into this case. Remember, she's been missing since 1984. Her family moved away. Mm-hmm. So the Greeley police decided that right before Christmas, literally on December 20th, the same day that she disappeared, but this time in 2018, they were going to release the video of the concert where she was singing that night, where she was last seen alive, right? And so they released this video. And I mean, when you look at it now, we're going to play a clip. Keep in mind, it's very old videotape, but she's on the staircase, right? all lined up with the children, and she's singing. And then the police just circle her so you can see which one she is. I mean, the place is packed with children. We're going to play that clip now. Anyway, when I saw that video last night, it completely changed everything for me. Because she's so cute and innocent.
Oh, she is. And she looks so happy. And I can't imagine what her family felt, because in some ways they were almost hoping that maybe she just ran away, right? Because what's the other alternative? But she's not the kind of person who would run away. She seemed happy in her home. She was in this choir. She had a nice life. It didn't sound like this was a very conflictual family at all. So I'm sure.
And I'm sorry, but it was Christmas, right? So this is like the happiest time for kids. It's 5 days away from Christmas and presents. In fact, you know, as the days progressed and Christmas came, there were all these presents under the tree for her.
Right.
Presents she's never opened, will never open. I can't even imagine what Christmas is like for this family, right? Because it's always on this anniversary that they're going to remember the tragedy of their daughter disappearing and never knowing what happened to her. Okay, now let's get into who is now accused of having kidnapped her and murdered her. So remember, her remains were found in 2019, and it is at that point when they found her remains and they positively identified her. And you know, her parents were finally able to bury her. There's this amazing photo. There weren't a lot of remains, obviously, but they were given to the family, and the mother and father put it in the tiniest of little coffins.
Oh.
And they buried her properly, respectfully. Right. And in fact, you know, her body was found 18 miles away from her home in this shallow grave. Oh my God, Judy. She was still wearing the Christmas outfit that you saw in the video for the concert.
Oh.
Tattered, just bits of fabric left, her red blouse, that little vest that she was wearing, and her skirt. Oh, my Lord, I'm getting upset. Okay, so at this point, the Greenlee police decide to reveal publicly that they have a person of interest. Now, they've had this guy on the radar for a long time because of the actions which they recently released. Over the years, he did a lot of really bizarre things. Okay, bizarre is not necessarily criminal, but in this case, it's all connected to Jonelle. All of it. So her remains are found, and they publicly say, all right, this is suspect number 1. Okay, so who is this guy? He ran for governor of Ohio twice, once as a Republican in 2018, and then 4 years earlier as a Constitution Party candidate. The reason I want to tell you a little bit about him is that he and his family ended up moving away from Greenlee after this happened. He claimed that he was home that night, the night that she was abducted, and he was never really considered a suspect at that point. But again, he was on police radar for a long time because of the actions that he allegedly took. He's very public. He's said a lot of things publicly. So not casting any judgment here, but these are the things that he has said about himself over the years. Because remember, when you run for office, everything is revealed. So Pankey told several news organizations that he calls himself, quote, a celibate homosexual who was attacked and harassed because of his sexuality. He says he was kicked out of the army because of it. And then he says, I repented and then I left the homosexual life in 1976. Does that sound like someone who's dealing with some repressed feelings here?
Yes. And also he claims that this is the history of his family, which is actually a very religious family, but that his family was basically, in his words, filled with homosexuals. And he also said, in all indications, that his father was a workaholic and basically gave very little attention to his children. His father was a pastor, and unbelievably, the narcissistic tendencies of this man basically wrote an autobiography of himself that seemed like it was mixing some truth with fantasy, but he used real names of people and he was a main character in his book. And this is where some of these details were coming out. So this is a person who was obviously obsessed with himself because maybe as a child, he didn't get that love and nurturance from his parents that he so craved. And now he's just basically running amok, doing whatever the heck he wants.
It's very strange. And he lived just 2 miles from Jonelle's house. Now, that doesn't mean anything, but it certainly places him in close proximity to her home and the abduction. So when police revealed that they suspected Pankey, Pankey sat down and he did do a lot of interviews, but the most telling one is the one he did with the Colorado Sun and again, other numerous news organizations. And he has said all along that he had nothing to do with Jonelle's disappearance or murder. But here are some of the bizarre things that he told the newspaper and other news organizations, which we must share. Pankey claims that the family friend, the one who dropped off Jonelle that night after the Christmas concert, is an enemy of his, right? Is an enemy of Pankey's because back in the 70s when Pankey was trying to unionize the 7-Up bottling plant, this guy attacked him. So he's immediately pointing police in direction of, oh, you better look at the guy who dropped her off because he's probably the one who did it. Okay, well, maybe all that is true, right? Then he tells the Colorado Sun that he was kicked out of the same church that Jonelle's family attended after he was accused of raping the church piano player. But the charges were later dropped because he passed a polygraph test. Who is this guy?
And you know what, Anna? I have heard of other convicted criminals passing the polygraph test. And the problem with the polygraph test and why it's not widely admissible in court is because the people that you definitely want to catch tend to be the ones that pass, because we have found neurobiological research that shows that people who are psychopaths and serial murderers, their brain activity is just very weirdly kind of more stable than the average person, so that when they lie and when they tell the truth, their brain activity looks kind of the same. They're able to lie and not start sweating or start shaking or have big changes in their brain waves. So you think, oh, well, this person, I guess, is telling the truth. This is not the first time something like this happened. And that actually scares me even more about this particular person and all the things that he was able to get away with before this crime.
That's really interesting. So when the person is such a pathological liar, their lies are the truth, and therefore physically there's no indication that they're lying.
Absolutely. And what we find too is that because their brain activity tends to be in general lower overall than the normal human being, that they need more things to stimulate them. And this also shows why sometimes they can do these horrible, egregious things, kill somebody, hide the body in the woods, and then just saunter off whistling, going to get McDonald's and watching a movie, because they are not that activated, even in the most extreme of circumstances. So it's not like they're freaking out. They're not really in a fight or flight situation the way that we might be if we were just witnesses to something like that.
Now, this is the one that I find the most interesting, just only because it's intriguing to me, because we're talking about Colorado here. When JonBenet Ramsey disappeared and then was later found murdered, this all happened around Christmas. Pankey called the police to remind them that Jonelle's case also happened at Christmas. And this is way before her body was ever found, right? Remember, this little girl's body hasn't been found. Jonelle wasn't found until 2019. Okay, so who sits there looking at the incredible JonBenet Ramsey case and all the headlines and says, "Oh, this sounds just like this case, Jonelle's case"? Okay.
Yes.
All right. I don't look. And of course, there are some similarities here. I don't know. It's Colorado. I'm not trying to be a conspiracy theorist, but I do find it interesting that this all took place in Colorado. That's all I'm going to say. And just very creepy. All right. Then Pankey tells the Colorado Sun that he willingly gave the Greenlee police a sample of his DNA. Well, the police said officially, we never asked him for a sample of the DNA. So why put that out there? Why would you put that out there?
Isn't it weird that over the many years that this investigation was actually either active or obviously clearly unsolved, that he just kept inserting himself into this case in various ways as a person of interest? It was like he wanted to get caught, or that he was taunting the police, maybe. Like, even though I'm giving you all of these clues, you're still never going to solve the mystery. I don't know what kind of person does this, but we do know that he has this huge, long history of also accusing other people of all kinds of things. So as you said, while he was inserting himself as a person of interest, he was also blaming this other person who dropped off Jonelle and saying that he was an enemy of his. But throughout the years, he had made lots of harassing calls to other people, blamed police, blamed the military, blamed church people. I mean, there's so many things that just don't add up about this guy. And he really had a very long history of not getting along with people, to say the least.
Absolutely. In fact, all these comments that he made to the investigating authorities became part of the case against him. Here's a clip from a news conference when they announced his indictment.
There are a number of statements that he has made over the course of time, both to courts, to law enforcement, to in unsolicited letters, in which he indicates some very intimate knowledge about the commission of the crime, information that the general public and the media was not privy to.
What I find interesting is that the authorities say that while he was annoying and constantly contacting the cops about this case, he had information, they say, that no one else could know, that the police didn't release, so the public and the media couldn't have known some of the bizarre things he was saying. So while he may have been pointing the finger in other directions, he was revealing information supposedly that he had nobody else did.
And what is so striking about this case, Anna, is that because this case is older in terms of how much time has passed since Jonelle has been missing, we have a ton of information on Pankey. And he actually is this textbook case in terms of the kind of person who becomes a serial criminal or serial killer. He has all of these warning signs all along the way. And it's just incredible that somehow he didn't end up in prison for something else before finally having this case solved just now.
According to the indictment, he allegedly took Jonelle Matthews from her home on that night, sometime between 8:30 and 9:30. They're able to zero in on that time frame. So at some point, the authorities say that not only did he kidnap her, but that he shot her in the head. So we know how she was killed. And clearly that is something you would know from her remains. The indictment reveals, again, that Pankey intentionally inserted himself into the investigation numerous times over the years, claiming to have knowledge of the crime, and how all of this became so inconsistent that it started attracting attention to himself. Like he created his own problems. Had he just moved away and shut up, it's possible that no one ever would have looked at him, right?
Right.
But he constantly is like, oh, hey, I'm over here and I have information. So in some ways, that's a blessing for if he really did do it, that he did help police get to him. So in September of 2019, authorities say they served a search warrant on Pankey's Twin Falls, Idaho home. They had search warrants for the home and all the vehicles. And when they served it, he knew why they were there, because the probable cause on the search warrant was that they believed he had kidnapped and killed Jonelle. So he knew in 2019 he was prime suspect number one. He was arrested in Idaho. Now, what's interesting is, remember, this guy continues, well, maybe not now behind bars, but up until the time he was arrested, he kept talking about this case and doing so many interviews that one of his attorneys, and I don't know if it's the same attorney now because, he's not the easiest guy to represent, shall we say. His attorney says that there is no physical evidence linking him to the murder. And that might be very interesting in this case. Is there or isn't there DNA evidence? We don't know that, right? We don't know that. But the attorney admitted that Pankey does like to talk to the media a lot. But this was his defense of his client. He said, even though he talks a lot, he really doesn't say anything of substance. And that's because he didn't do it.
Wow. That's an interesting defense, especially because in his indictment, there were a number of incriminating statements that were very highly specific, not to mention that he had been repeatedly searching for information about Jonelle on the internet himself and then tried to delete all this evidence after the Greeley detectives contacted him earlier in 2019. So it's almost like, Anna, any attention is good attention, if you've ever heard of that phrase. And if this person was starved for attention as a kid, maybe he kept inserting himself and giving these crumbs that I believe are actually very significant, because he was almost like, please look at me. It's almost like he wanted to be connected to this. He wanted to make sure that his name was coming up in the papers and then eventually the internet, as obviously the world grew and more technologically advanced.
Well, as I watched all these videos, these interviews he did with the local TV stations that were covering this case in Colorado, I'm like, he's sitting there, all casual, like answering questions and like, no, I didn't do it. Most people who are implicated in something as serious as murder don't sit around ever so casually discussing it, but then again, in his mind, if he doesn't think he did anything wrong, he might be like, hey, I'm going to keep talking because I didn't do anything.
Or he's like, finally, my 15 minutes of fame. And as you know, Anna, the more that we do have widespread coverage, because now the news does travel so quickly, the more he maybe is in love with that idea. Like, wow, not only am I going to be covered on the local news, I might also make it into an article on the internet. And he might actually revel in that a little bit. It's kind of gross, but I do wonder if that was a piece of it. I mean, think about this guy with a history of running for public office, believing that he could actually be somebody who would be voted into office. I mean, again, just these bizarre ideas of maybe grandiosity, that he was more important and special than perhaps other people think he is.
Well, clearly he is a sick individual, and I am not a certified therapist as you are, but he's definitely a weirdo. And if he did do this, I hope that there is justice for Jonelle's family.